I'm infatuated with this concept of impossible. So infatuated that I have made it my life's mission to make things not impossible. And the way that I go about doing that is this mashup of technology and story. Technology, for me, my past life as a producer, was this space of animation and design and graphics and things that came out of a computer, but in a 3D way or a 2D way. But now, the world that I play in now is technology, but it's technology for the sake of humanity. And what that means is, how do you take something and crack it open and modify it and zip tie it or duct tape it back together and maybe reprogram it in a way so that it accomplishes a fundamental social and human need? And the way that I go about doing that is that once you create that, then you make it accessible to people, right? If you make something and no one has access to it, then what's the point? So then we try to get that out there as much as we can, right? The story side, I look through this lens called help one, help many. And what this means is, if I said to you guys today, who here wants to help me cure hunger? Who here has a clue how to do that? You're like, oh, yeah, or you do. Good, let's talk after this. But that's big, right? That's really, really big. But if I said, hey, when I was coming in today, it was cold, and there was a guy outside, and he looked hungry. Looked like he needed something to eat. Let's everybody chip in a buck, everybody put a buck in a hat, and let's go buy the guy a sandwich. Now we've helped one person, but maybe we put in a couple bucks. Now we can buy a couple sandwiches and more sandwiches for people. And that's how it starts to spread. You help one person, and then it starts to spread to many. So the lens that I look through when any project that I'm about to take on, I look through this lens of who is the one? Who's the one person I focus that story on that can then help many, many people? So I'm out to dinner, and a friend says, hey, you got to check this guy out named Dr. Tom. So I went home and I researched him. And what I found out about this guy is he's this doctor in the Nuba Mountains, which is this area between Sudan and South Sudan. And he is the only doctor within a 1,500-mile radius, and he literally does everything from deliver babies to appendectomies. If it's medical, he's the only guy who can do it. And so I'm learning about this guy, and later on in the article it says, the one thing he hates to do is to perform amputations, which begs the question, why is he performing amputations? And what I learned is the area of the Nuba Mountains, especially the area where he is in, is constantly being bombarded by President Bashir, the current reigning president of Sudan. And what he does is he runs this campaign of terror over the public there, and he bombs them with rolling these 55-gallon drums filled with jet fuel and shrapnel out of the back of these big turboprop planes. Right? It's horrible. They hit the ground, they make a crater, shrapnel goes flying everywhere, and so if you're in that path of the shrapnel, not doing so good. So because of that, there's foxholes everywhere, people will jump into caves, but there's a system, and then when the dust settles, people come out and they carry on about their day. But there was one particular amputation that Dr. Tom had to do, and he talked about a young boy named Daniel who was out tending his family's goats and cows. He heard the bombers come, and he was out in the field, so there's no foxhole to jump in. And so he wrapped his arms around a tree that was closest to him. The bomb went off not far from him. The tree protected his body from the blast, but that blew off his arms. And so I'm reading this story, and I was like, oh. And what got me is what he said when he woke up. He realized that he was now an armless Sudanese boy. And it's hard enough to stay alive in Sudan with arms. And he said, if I could die, I would, because now I'm going to be such a burden to my family. Look, everybody here has experienced despair before, but can you imagine actually wanting to be dead because you don't want to be a pain to your parents? So I'm reading this is all happening at my kitchen counter, and I'm reading this, and just down the hallway, these guys are asleep, right? My guys. And I couldn't imagine them waking up with that feeling of like, oh, I wish I was dead. So I have a process, and my process is you commit, then you figure out how the heck you're going to pull it off. And I read this, and I saw this about this young boy named Daniel, and I said, I got to do something. I don't know what, but I got to do something. So the way I work and the way I kind of look for things is I start to go, wait a second, I read something or I did something about that. And we had just done an article about this carpenter, this brilliant carpenter in South Africa who accidentally cut his fingers off in a table saw accident, and he had to 3D print fingers for himself. And I'm like, okay, wait, so if that guy's printing fingers, maybe we can kind of come over and we can use that finger thing to make an arm thing for Daniel. Maybe there's something there. So that's what I call, when you see things that are tangential or relative to what your problem is, that's what I call morsels of permission. You look for little morsels and bits and bobs here, and you start to pull those together and put them all into a pile, and that's your end solution. So I invited all these brilliant people to my house, people way smarter than myself, and we started to explore different ways that we could make an arm for Daniel. And we played around with different types of plastic, we played with 3D printing, we played with even balsa wood, and the result of the weekend was a gigantic failure. Nothing worked. Here's what kind of failure was. A friend of ours came over and she was missing a left arm. We printed her a right arm. That's that gives you a taste test of kind of how the weekend went. So I was going, right? I'm going. And Richard, the carpenter who had cut his fingers off, had actually generously come out to help us. And he said, mate, I don't think you should go. First of all, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Sudan is gnarly, and you are going to be a big, tall, bald, shining target walking around. And he goes, and there's this thing, you don't have an arm. There's that thing too. He said, you're still going, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I gotta go. I'm going. Tickets are bought. I'm going. He goes, all right, I figured you'd say that. So here's the deal. Why don't you come to my place in South Africa? I'll teach you how to 3D print. I'll teach you everything that I know. And then if you're ready, then off you go. And I said, all right, deal. So hopped in a plane. I was petrified because when I got on the plane, I didn't know how to 3D print. I'm going to Sudan to make something for this boy who I've never met before, but I'd never made it before. But I'm getting on this plane, and so here we go, Geronimo. I hop on, I go to Richard's place. He teaches me everything. He teaches me how to 3D print. He teaches me how to work with hands. He teaches me how to work with amputees and kind of the details of the fingers and how everything works. And he teaches me. And so we're like, all right, here we go. It's working. He shows me how to do it. So I say goodbye to his family. I hop on a plane. I land in Sudan. That's not the plane. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in front of you right now. I land in Sudan, and the organization that's with us take us over to this little shed that we called home, and we just started to work, right? We just started to work, and we kind of cleaned it up and started getting set up. And we started to print, and we started to make the mold of the arm for Daniel, and we started to kind of figure out how it would work and how it would fit. And I was nervous because I'm like, I've never done this before, and oh my God. And, there's a thing in carpentry, you measure twice, cut once. I'm measuring 7 times and cutting once. And we go through this process, and literally everything that could go wrong did. You guys know how 3D printing works. The filament was it was so hot, was melting to itself before it got into the 3D printer. The bugs were dive bombing the printer and jamming up the printer. Everything was going, the electricity was surging. Everything was going wrong. But every day we'd wake up and there's Daniel, and he's like, what's up? How's it going? Big, shiny, tall guy. And so we just kind of kept pushing through it. And then 4 days to the day that I read the article about Dr. Tom, we made an arm for Daniel. And Daniel fed himself for the first time in 2 years. And thank you. And it was awesome. It was awesome to watch him be able to now have that independence. But we didn't show up just to help Daniel, right? It's how do you make this bigger? How do you help many people? So we didn't have a lot of time left, but we started to teach some of the locals in his village how to use these printers. And I started to teach them, and they'd never seen a 3D printer before, right? And we taught, and we kind of pushed them through all this stuff, and I ended up having to get on a plane and fly back to Los Angeles. And when I got on that plane, I'm like, I hope it works, but I didn't have enough time with them. Is it actually going to work? And I landed back in Los Angeles, and I got off the plane. It took me 4 days to get back. I landed, and I turned on my phone, and Dr. Tom had sent me an email, and he said, hey, hope the trip back wasn't too bad, but you'd be psyched to know while you were in the air, 2 more arms were made. And I'm walking through LAX just like, yes! And people are kind of looking at me as they're walking, their kids and their strollers by. And the crazy thing is that we ended up creating the world's first 3D printing prosthetic laboratory. Most arms cost 15 grand. The Daniel arm costs $100, right? And it's cheaper now. And how did we pull it off? And why did we pull it off? We found our one, right? We found our one. So the question that I ask you guys today in that concept of help one, help many, who's your one? And who is your Daniel? Cool. Thank you, guys.